Let's get more on the war in Ukraine with Lieutenant Colonel Daniel Davis. He's a senior fellow and military expert at Defense Priorities. Thank you so much for joining us this morning. So, of course, want to start with that explosion in Poland and now specifically this tension that we're seeing between Ukraine and NATO over the origins of that mission. Now, there's this investigation that's ongoing, but Ukraine was quick to pin the blame on Russia when it happened. And they're saying they doubt NATO's initial findings anyway, that it was likely Ukrainian, part of their air defense system as it was trying to protect itself from these Russian missiles. What do you make of all this? And are you concerned that incidents like this, as we see, just how easily this can spill over into a bordering country, put the U.S. at risk of getting dragged into this conflict in a more boots on the ground type of way?
Yeah, you hit it, the nail right on the head. Those are exactly the things that I'm concerned about. And when you look at the where that missile landed, you look at where Russia sent its caliber missiles that it attacked that day, it actually makes a lot of sense that a Ukrainian anti-aircraft missile missed its target and then landed in Poland. So, I don't know why the president of Ukraine is going to such lengths to contradict, the president of the United States and all of the Western European leaders, because it's an act or it's an accident that happens in war, and it's just unfortunate. But I think they should move on from it. But the bigger issue that you point out to is this exposes just the risk that anything could happen. An accident, a miscalculation, a mistake could draw the United States in. Because imagine if instead of hitting a farm, this had hit some of the U.S. troops in Poland or some of the other Western NATO allies. You can understand that we'd be having a very different conversation this morning if that had happened.
Yeah, absolutely. Now I want to kind of talk about where this could go from here and what you anticipated. I know you actually wrote a piece outlining something kind of similar to this. We'll get to that in just a moment. First, though, I want to play some sound from General Mark Milley speaking about Ukraine's chances of a military, specifically, victory in this war. First, let's listen to that.
The probability of a Ukrainian military victory, defined as kicking the Russians out of all of Ukraine, to include what they define or what they claim as Crimea, the probability of that happening anytime soon is not high, militarily. Politically, there may be a political solution where politically the Russians withdraw. That's possible.
So as we heard there, General Milley doesn't think there's this high probability of Ukraine, winning militarily, though a political solution might be possible. Do you agree with that? And if so, what would that look like?
Well, that actually, in this 1945 piece that you're referring to, I actually point that out, that there's not a military solution that even is on the cards that Ukraine could drive Russia out, because the capacity is just not there. At the same time that Russia has just mobilized hundreds of thousands of more troops that are on the way in there. So Milley is completely right. There is no military path for Ukraine to win the war as defined by kicking the Russians out. So that leaves the only alternative, the most rational alternative, is a diplomatic solution. The big problem comes in that right now that Zelensky doesn't want to have a negotiation, because that would mean he would have to cede some territory. Russia right now doesn't want negotiations because they think this winter offensive is going to win them even more territory. And so right now, until that plays out, I don't think there's even any possibility of a negotiated settlement, though I think that's what should happen to save Ukrainian people.
Very quickly, before I let you go, walk us through the rest of these objectives that you sort of wrote here for Russia's winter offensive.
Yeah, they have. There's a couple of several different options where they could have what's called like a low risk opportunity, where they just try to bring these troops in, these new troops, and defend what they currently have. There's a medium risk where they'll try to maybe complete capture of the Donbass, and then in some of the other areas, maybe retake Kherson and then hold there. The problem with each of those is that leaves Ukraine in a position to launch another offensive later on. So I think, as I'll talk about later, that the biggest risk is a large-scale offensive by the Russians to completely devastate most of eastern Ukraine.
Lieutenant Colonel Davis, thank you so much for your time this morning. Important conversation.
And now back to the U.S. A new investigation